Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you all with us today for a very exciting announcement. I am Jessie Ramey. I direct the Women's Institute at Chatham University, and I chair the Gender Equity Commission for the City of Pittsburgh. And I'll be your MC today. I will not be speaking. First up, I'd like to introduce our Executive Director of the Gender Equity Commission, Dr. Anu Jan, who will be explaining why we're here.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It is really an exciting day. Those of us who've been working on the Gender Equity Commission since the start of 2018 have been waiting for this information to really make good policy recommendations based on current disaggregated data, and that's what this report references. I should also mention that the Gender Equity Commission started before its official first meeting in February of 2018 with a local coalition of organizations, including Pittsburgh for CEDAW. And so we thank all of them for getting us to this place where we start to look at how there may be barriers, gender-based barriers affecting people who live and work in our city. And we are working with departments to try and overcome those barriers. But we want to understand who lives and works in our city, and when we take a gender and race lens, we have a much better idea of what kinds of solutions are sustainable, fair, and just. And so I thank all of the people on the Gender Equity Commission. I work with a wonderful group of commissioners, and for the team from Pitt, who's on my left, because this is really a wonderful moment, and this tool is going to be very helpful for us, and we also hope others will use it throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jan. Next, we have with us Dr. Sarah Goodkind, who's an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Pittsburgh. She also teaches in the Department of Sociology and Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at Pitt, and she's going to help us understand a little bit about what makes this study so important.
Thanks, Jessie. I'm delighted to be here today with our Pitt Gender Analysis team, who are all over here, with our partners from the Gender Equity Commission, and of course with the mayor. Thank you. We're really excited to share with you the first in a series of 4 reports that our Pitt team is preparing. In just a moment, my colleague will share findings from the first of these reports. But before she does, I want to give a very brief preview of all of the reports so that you know what you have to look forward to. So Report 1, which we'll hear about in just a moment, uses census, education, and health data to examine gender and race equity among city residents. Report 2, which will be released in November, examines gender and race representation and equity among city employees. Report 3 examines people's lived experiences and will be based on focus groups that we're conducting with Pittsburgh residents. This allows us to go beyond the groups represented in the first report, where we are limited by our data sources, to include the experiences of Pittsburgh residents in all their diversity. The final report will summarize findings from the first 3 and include specific policy recommendations for addressing inequities revealed through the research. And next, we're going to hear findings from this first report, which is called Pittsburgh's Inequality Across Gender and Race.
I'm really pleased to introduce one of the lead researchers who's going to explain the data now. This is Dr. Junia Howell, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Pittsburgh and one of the lead authors on this white paper.
Thank you, Jessie. Yes, it is a great pleasure to be here and get to actually dive into a quick summary of the report that you guys have in front of you. So today, to do that, I'm going to begin by explaining why it's innovative and new. Then I'm going to give you a few key findings and then conclude by telling you our main takeaways that we want you to walk out of here today. So aligning with the mayor's general goal of building a resilient city that's livable for all, we, like previous reports done by the city and the University of Pittsburgh, in fact, are looking at residents' outcomes across health, income, employment, and education. Yet, unlike previous reports, we're doing two unique things. So the first thing we're doing, which Anu alluded to, is we're actually taking an intersectional approach, looking simultaneously at both race and gender. So no other gender analysis across the country has done this with empirical data, and no other report, particularly in Pittsburgh, has. So we have a really great, new, unique opportunity to look at these two at the same time. The second key contribution that we're making is we're actually creating a brand new tool to evaluate how these inequalities work. So previous reports have looked at Pittsburgh's livability and ranked Pittsburgh compared to other cities, but only done so comparing all residents as the same. Other reports have looked at inequality within Pittsburgh, but not compared Pittsburgh to other cities. Why that is not problematic, why that has some shortcomings is because we don't know when we just look at inequality. Is that like other places? Is that the national norm? Where is Pittsburgh as far as it goes when it comes to these various inequalities and outcomes? So we combine these two and create our own tool. And with this, we create what we're calling an index of ranked livability, where we rank over 50 outcomes across health, income, education, and employment. And in doing that, we're able to not only identify how Pittsburgh's residents, how their livability ranks up to their counterparts in other cities, but also what priorities Pittsburgh should work on as far as room for where we have areas for improvement. So given that, generally speaking, our findings show that for white men in Pittsburgh is in the kind of the modal 50% of cities for most outcomes. So most outcomes across health, employment, income, and education, Pittsburgh's white men are similar to white men in cities across the country. Likewise, Pittsburgh's white women have similar outcomes to those in comparable cities across the country. Combined Asian, multiracial, Latinx, other race individuals, and Native Americans across both men and women in Pittsburgh have both, and some outcomes average, and in other outcomes even above average outcomes when we're comparing their same gender counterparts in other cities. However, the story is quite different when it comes to Pittsburgh's Black residents. Most notably among these is Pittsburgh's Black women's maternal mortality rate. Compared to other cities, Black women in Pittsburgh are more likely to die from maternal mortality or have a higher maternal mortality rate than 97% of other cities' Black women's maternal mortality rate. This is even though Black women in Pittsburgh are more likely to seek prenatal care than Black women in other cities, as well as less likely to have diabetes, hypertension, and infection during pregnancy. Likewise, Pittsburgh's Black women are more likely to be unemployed and live in poverty than Black women in other cities. It's a similar story when it comes to our Black men. Our Black men have a higher level of occupational segregation, as well as higher rates of homicide and dying of cancer and cardiovascular disease than Black men in the comparable cities around the country. So saying that in a completely different way, what this means is that if Black residents got up today and left and moved to the majority of any other city in the US, automatically by just moving, their life expectancy would go up, their income would go up, their educational opportunities for their children would go up, as well as their employment. Of course, we don't want that to happen, but the reality is that if we don't reckon with the inequality in Pittsburgh and that it's much greater than the vast majority of cities in the US, we are not only not making the city livable for our Black residents, but for all of us. And so as we walk away from here, the main takeaways is this story about the inequality, particularly for Black women in Pittsburgh. And what I want you to recognize is that for many of our Black residents, this is not going to even seem like a huge finding. They live this, they know this every day. And yet this is the first time that we've empirically established that Pittsburgh is distinct when it comes to these inequality patterns in other cities. And of course, that's important to help all of Pittsburgh recognize that we need to focus on this and work towards making it a more livable city. The good news is we know lots of other cities are doing better, which means Pittsburgh can do better too. This is not just a relic of national trends. It's something that our local interventions, of which the Gender Commission is taking a lead on, can work to make our city livable for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Junia. I'd now like to introduce Megan Block, who is a partner with Healy & Block. She's also a member of our Gender Equity Commission and chairs the Gender Analysis Committee, who's going to tell you why we think these findings matter.
Good afternoon. We are so grateful for the groundbreaking intersectional research that the Pitt team for the gender analysis has done for the Gender Equity Commission. As you just heard, this data tells us what a lot of us already knew. We have a real problem when it comes to racial and gender equity in the city of Pittsburgh. But as a commission, we can't actually fix a problem until we know what the problem is. So as you also heard today, after the report that is released today, we will be receiving 2 other white papers, followed by policy-based, research-based policy recommendations. These findings and recommendations will then help the Gender Equity Commission focus on the residents who are suffering the most so that we can truly help the city of Pittsburgh become a livable city for all. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Dean Betsy Farmer from the School of Social Work at the University of Pittsburgh, who would like to talk a little bit about why this partnership with the city is so important. Dean Farmer?
Hello, it's wonderful to be here. When I took the job of dean at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work last spring, the first email I think I got was from Sarah Goodkind saying that they had just heard about the possibility of doing this, and she wanted to make sure that she had my blessing to enter into this because the findings might not put us in the best light and might reveal things that people would not want to hear, and did I mind that? And I told her, absolutely, I do not mind that. That is what we're supposed to be doing. We're looking at what the problems are and what the solutions are, and that's what a healthy relationship between a community and its university partners can be. So we take great pride at the School of Social Work and at the University of Pittsburgh in being really the University of Pittsburgh. We're not just sitting here in Pittsburgh, but we actually are part of this community. The outcomes that affect all the residents of Pittsburgh affect us, and we are a part of the solution. We also, I would guess, are part of the problem. I think that the things that are being revealed at the city level we are not immune to at the university. And so we need to all do better with what we're trying to do. I really loved, you all have gotten a super brief overview of what this report says, but as I read through it, I was very impressed by the nuances of things. Some of them are very low-hanging fruit of things that could be addressed quite easily. Others are long-term systemic issues that we need to address and work on. But we can do that together, and so I really hope that this is the beginning of a partnership where we can bring our expertise, you all in this room can bring your expertise, and we can work with everyone around the city and the area to actually improve the things that we're seeing in this report to create a more equitable and livable city for everyone.
And finally, I invite our mayor, Mayor Peduto, to come talk with us about the findings and what we'll be doing with this work in the city of Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you also to the Commission for the work that you've put into this, University of Pittsburgh, and the research that you put behind it. Pittsburgh is blessed that we are the 6th city in the United States that has adopted the United Nations CEDAW principles. This is a doctrine against all types and forms of discrimination against women. Pittsburgh is also recognized in that when we launched our Gender Equity Commission, this really wasn't something that other cities were doing. And there were a lot of questions over what the mission of the commission would be. But as Mayor Bloomberg used to say, trust in God, for everything else, show me the data. We had an understanding of where there was going to be great inequality within this city and where the opportunities for women were being held back. But we didn't have the opportunity to have the information readily available to us because nobody had done the research the way that the University of Pittsburgh has provided before. And when I say no one has done the research, I don't mean simply in Pittsburgh. This research is unique in the way that it has been presented in being able to look at the intersection between race and gender and city to city and find specifically where the greatest inequity exists, and then to be able to create policy around that type of data to be able to measure and see success. And now the commission has a very firm mandate. It shows where we need to do better and how we can do it. Now, when we talk about One Pittsburgh, I know some politicians like to think of it as a big check. And this big cardboard check comes from the University of Pittsburgh, and all of our potholes are filled. Well, that's not reality, number one. And number two, that's a really inefficient way to work as a community as one. When we talk about One Pittsburgh, it's about not only getting the University of Pittsburgh behind this initiative, just like we went to the City University of New York to look at race, but to allow the University of Pittsburgh to be a part as we look at discrimination against women, and then to help us implement it, then to help us be a part of it. Because it's one thing if we as a city get behind this and we work to make sure that every one of our employees has an equal opportunity for success, and each one of their families and their children are given that same opportunity, but it's just a drop in the bucket. What we need are major employers in this town, our largest institutions, using this same data in order to change Pittsburgh. And then we need our corporate community. Start by looking at your board, look at your C-suite, and then look at the people around you. The people that don't have as much as you do, the ones you walk with in downtown Pittsburgh. And start asking, what are you doing to make their lives better? What are you doing to improve that opportunity for that young woman who's standing at the bus stop waiting to get between 3 buses to get home from school? You know, there's a lot of poverty within the city of Pittsburgh, and we deal with the symptoms of the poverty. But we have a great opportunity if we can get this data and be able to give people an opportunity for an equal playing field. That's all. Just an equal playing field so that every person has that potential in life. One of the paragraphs that I found most interesting, and this goes right back to the research that you conducted. The major findings include serious inequality and opportunity for improvement. And just those words alone, that exists in the city that we call home, that is a part of daily living in Pittsburgh. Serious inequality and opportunity for improvement lacking in Black women's maternal mortality. We have rates within our Black community that are third world when it comes to infant mortality. And there shouldn't be anybody in the city of Pittsburgh that can accept that fact and not be asking, what am I doing, and what's my company doing, and what is my organization doing in order to change it? There is serious inequality and a lack of opportunity for improvement in employment for Black women. There's serious inequality in poverty and in college readiness. And we can prove this with numbers. The inequality is real. And if we just stay within race, Black men's occupational segregation, meaning we have jobs for Black men and then for others, and we accept that as somehow being okay. Homicide rate, which we see on a constant basis. Cancer, which is a direct effect of what we're doing with our built environment and how much pollution we're putting in our lowest income neighborhoods. Cardiovascular disease, low enrollment in college admission exams, and school police referrals for all students, meaning that instead of a young kid going through Pittsburgh public schools and having a resume ready to go to college, they have a rap sheet. And then we ask why they're not succeeding. These are the real barriers to Pittsburgh right now. These are the stresses and the shocks that will keep this city from ever realizing its potential. And the only way that we solve it is the 1PGH model. All hands on deck, an understanding that this is a priority of this city in recognizing where we still have a lot of work to do, and calling on everyone, not just city government, to join us.